Missouri Gateway Chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council. Today, I know some of you are members of our chapter and some are not members, but for those who are not members, please consider joining our chapter as a member. There are various different levels in order to do that. So the goal of our coffee breaks are to provide an opportunity for our community to engage in conversational hot topics of different things over really a cup of joe. So it's a short format of 30 minutes, and we'll try to keep it to that, even though we might have some really great conversation going. But I'm really excited for all of you to be here and for our special guest. So today's special guest is Dr. Katy Mike Smaistrla, and she is the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Coordinator for the University of Missouri in St. Louis. So I'm going to go over a couple of guidelines before we get started. So just to give you an idea of how to set up your Zoom if you're not as familiar with it, which I'm sure all of us are very familiar with Zoom now, but if you would like to switch it from the speaker view to like more of a grid view so you can see everybody in the right hand corner, you can then toggle that. The chat function is accessible below in order for you to help facilitate any conversation or any topics that you would like to there. Try to be respectful of other people when talking. Also, try not to jump over other people, and then please allow others to join in the conversation as well. But feel free to join in the conversation without being called upon. But if you really do want to join in on the conversation and not interrupt someone, just use one of the reaction buttons that are below, like a little wave or a thumbs up, and then I'll make sure that I get you called upon so that you can join in the conversation in the next break. And please try to keep yourself muted unless speaking, just to avoid some background. So without further ado, Dr. Katy Mike.
All right. Thanks, Brandon. All right, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. So today, our coffee talk, we are talking about the skills and competencies of a sustainability professional. And so with that word professional in mind, I'd like for you to just a little thought exercise to start us off, if you would please. Picture someone that you think of as a professional or a leader in the field of sustainability. So this isn't necessarily someone that's leading by doing the right thing in their everyday life, but someone that's actually perhaps working in the field or leading in a more public way. So just take a moment to maybe think of some of the characteristics that person possesses and how you would describe them to a friend. And then if you'd like, sharing some of those, that'd be great. I'd love to hear them in the chat box, or if you'd like to type some of those characteristics, or just to get us all talking so it's not just my voice as we start, I invite you to share.
I'll go first. I would say the person I'm thinking of, actually it's multiple people, but they tend to all be very energetic and very excited and very enthusiastic about what they're doing.
Excellent. And we see a few coming in the chat box. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would add, in particular for sustainability, I think in being a leader is being just willing to try a lot of new things, since this field in particular tends to change so much over time, that there's a constant view towards professional development and learning new skills.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and that's a great segue. I think that's one of the things we notice about this particular field is that it is transdisciplinary, to use that term if I could. And I think that's as we continue to grow as a field, we're continuing to evolve. And there's been a lot of thought already around this idea of what does it take to be a professional in this growing field. I won't call it emerging anymore because it's here, it's done, it's been around for a way long time, but it is still continuing to evolve. And so I think if we look at some of that thought leadership, that's why I come to you today, is because I just finished some of my research on this very concept of what does it take to be a sustainability professional, what kind of skills and competencies are necessary. But I'm not the first one to research this. There's a lot of literature out there already. And higher ed obviously is looking at this very closely as universities develop majors in sustainability, or as they consider how to train future employable professionals, right? And so that would be why universities may be interested. But I think it's also interesting to note that trade associations are looking to this too. And so in the chat box, I've just put in a few links to different organizations and their thoughts on what it takes to be a sustainability professional, or what the skills necessary are. So you see a website to the International Society of Sustainability Professionals, and on their thought leadership page, multiple links to competencies, or the word competency is referenced. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, but that's the UK's version of ISSP. And they have a whole skills map. It's really very interesting, very interactive. And of course, they want you to pay for those trainings and that professional development to develop those skills, right? And so there we see both, I guess, some of the organizations that are trying to promote the development of such skills, offering this opportunity for professional development. And so if higher ed is telling students or researching, this is what sustainability professionals need, we have professional organizations saying, here's how you can help develop those skills. I think it's interesting that now we can have a conversation somewhere in between. And so that's what I'm hoping to do today, that we can kind of look to some of that research, but also kind of just speak from personal experience. And so some of that research out there, just to quickly review some of it, if you're not familiar, that's what research is, right? We take data and we clump it and lump it in different forms and fashions, and then you write a paper on how you lumped and clumped and it was different than somebody else's categorization. And so in my particular work, what I was really looking at was the particular lumps and clumps that had to do with social and emotional competencies, in particular, the soft skills, if you were, because a lot of work had already been done on creative or strategic competencies, or critical and normative thinking, or the ability systems competence is another one. And in fact, I think when we start to throw around all these different types of terms, these may or may not be terms you're familiar with. So if there is anything I need to stop and back up, please just let me know, and I can definitely explain some more of these terms. But I think as one of the terms I'd like to clarify just to begin with is this idea of competence and competency and skill. So I'm using skill interchangeably with competence or competency. And on those two websites I just threw up, you see both words kind of used. So for my purposes, I'd like to say that a competence is work related. That's like your hard skill. Whereas a competency is more people related or soft skills. And then looking at those soft skills, like I did in my research, I also looked at not just sustainability. I think that's, you know, all research is personal to some degree, you could argue. And so my background isn't just sustainability. I started off in parks and recreation and interpretation. So I began to include in some of the people that I interviewed to see what skills they said they possessed or that I identified in the interviews. We looked at all of these other folks out there and who they'd interviewed before. And so when I went in to look at who I wanted to include, we my advisors and my cohort and I use this term, heritage leadership. So heritage being anyone that works to preserve cultural or natural resources and defining heritage in that way. So that could include all of the people doing informal education in parks and museum settings, as well as anyone doing the education for sustainability work. So it was nice to kind of include those folks in my interview. So I got to interview people that you may recognize, like David Orr, John Jarvis, the former head of the National Park Service under the Obama administration, Boris Simmons, the former founding NAAEE, National North American Association of Environmental Ed, Megan from the executive director of ASHE, which is the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Ed, Jamie Van Morik from the USGBC, one of their education coordinators. So it was nice to kind of take this really broad range of people that came from outdoor settings, like Rue Mapp from Outdoor Afro, as well as the former sustainability coordinator for McDonald's, right, Bob Langer. So it's nice to look across this range of people and to see what they all had in common and what some of those competences and competencies they had. All right, so thinking about some of that, I would say that the connection between those informal education settings that a park ranger may be doing, and then the connection that we do as sustainability professionals, we're hoping for this idea of behavior change or making meaning in order to encourage someone to do the right thing. And that's why I thought, well, maybe it has more to do with those social and emotional competencies, the softer skills. So I see that somebody's asked for a definition of systems competencies. And so I would say that's kind of the ability to collectively analyze complex systems. If you're interested in systems thinking, Donella Meadows would be a great author to look up. Somebody else can probably weigh in if they know more about systems thinking. But systems thinking, I think, is just one way of thinking differently. Other researchers have said that in addition to thinking in systems, to realize that we're all connected, it's also important to have strategic thinking skills, values thinking skills. So values thinking would be, you know, how you can justify what is right and what is wrong, and then futures thinking, so that that way of thinking, man, that one goes way back, right? And is probably best credited to Native or Indigenous ways of knowing, seventh generation principle and whatnot. So those different types of ways of thinking could be lumped into, you know, again, we're lumping and clumping in different ways. Every researcher's done it differently. One of the things that I noticed in my research was it's easier to kind of think of things in terms of skill sets, mindsets, and attributes. And so thinking about those three different categories, that's kind of what I'd like for us to go back and revisit some of those characteristics that we just thought about. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute, and hopefully I've given enough to chat about, to give you something to think about. And then those three categories, so attributes, mindsets, and skill sets. If we were to go back and look in the chat about that list of good at networking, interdisciplinary, good listening skills, thinking about those, are they attributes of the person? Are they mindsets, or are they skill sets? Just based on what you know of those words. So what do you all think about that? And if you want me to further define, I can. So if we were to say that attributes are the things that the abilities you innately have, right? Like you're born with something. Or if a mindset is something that the ability that you're habitually cultivating. So cultivating a mindset of critical reflection is a good, example, like where you are doing something with intention. And then skill sets being an ability that you train for. I took the class in Excel, I know how to do Excel, skill set. What would you say that some of these from our list are? Do we list more mindsets, skill sets, or attributes?
I think someone said networking, and I would probably say it really just depends. It feels more like an attribute to me, just because of the fact that sometimes that is an inherent ability from someone to be able to have good networking. But I think you can develop that if then I guess you learn how to do that. So it could potentially become a skill set.
Yeah, generally I would agree with that. I know people that are just innately extroverted and continually want to reach out and make connections and make that personal touch. And therefore, I would say they're innately that's an attribute of them as a person. So yeah, I agree. And I could also see it, like you said, being a skill set where, say a more, introverted person who maybe networking comes that's difficult for them, it is a skill set maybe they could pick up along the way if they, read a book or took a class or watched somebody else that is good at it. So I agree with you.
It's interesting because I was thinking of them as mindsets, actually, something that you habitually cultivate in good listening, networking, as something that you kind of work at as opposed to something that you could take a class in. So I was kind of putting them in the mindset category.
I think the thing that I'm a little bit wary of for attributes is it almost exclusionary in a sense. Like if you don't have these attributes, then you're not cut out to be a sustainability professional. Whereas with mindsets, it almost seems like kind of the intersection between a skill set and an attribute. So something that you have to work a little bit harder on and practice and cultivate, but it's something that you can attain with some practice.
That's a really interesting point. And that was one of the things that came out of the research, and that we realized was that there are always going to be things that we excel at and things that we need to practice. And so another reason why those social and emotional competencies become so important is that it's the ability to self-reflect and look back at yourself and say, this is where I need to improve, or this is where I, am already doing okay in. I don't think it necessarily precludes anyone from joining the field, though. We didn't really notice that, and I don't know. What do you all think? Would that, just because someone's not a good listener, does that prevent them from being a sustainability professional?
I think there's definitely some skills that you need, but you can function in different areas. For example, I know one of the competencies is interpersonal communication, and there are some people that are get stage fright of speaking in front of other people, and it's debilitating for them. And I know that in being maybe a sustainability professional, it really does force you to have those presentations or that communication in front of large groups of people. So it might not necessarily, that specific role might not be the direct or the right fit, but it could be that they are more comfortable in another capacity. Maybe they would rather be like a data analyst or something like that behind the scenes. but it's really knowing what your strengths are in order to play off of those so you can still be engaging in that community.
Yeah, and so I think in looking at all of the qualitative data that came out of my research and comparing it to what other researchers had come up with, there's a few themes that emerge, and I think in those themes we find a place for everyone. So some of those themes were that the leaders think differently. Leaders are people-oriented. Leaders are inclusive. Leaders benefit from connecting the past to the future, learning from our mistakes. Leaders take responsibility. And these are themes that you could pull from this type of research, or you could pull from, you know, the top 10 bestseller list on the Harvard Business Review's books on leadership. I think it's how, again, back to how you lump and clump. But the two skill sets that I think may be of interest as we continue this conversation that I'd like to pose to you here is that skill set number one is that sustainability leaders think differently. That and however you think about thinking, that we think differently, and that we navigate processes effectively and gracefully. And when I wrote that, I got a lot of pushback from my faculty, because gracefully was something that you might not think of yourself as the leader doing. Like sometimes leadership feels stilted or awkward, and it is not graceful in the moment. But that's where the looking inward and outward facing social emotional competencies you know, gets you through. Like I would say that empathy is a great example of, and it could be an attribute, it can be something that you practice as a mindset, or it could be how you use it to your day-to-day, you know, hiring and firing an employee. Those are, you know, you could consider that that paperwork a hard skill, but it's also, are you doing that with empathy? That could be done with grace, right? Handling that situation. And effectively, leaders navigate processes gracefully and effectively. Effectively is, you know, those competencies that and hard skills that we master. So there's no glitch in the paperwork, or no, you get things done right at the end of the day. Effective as we expect. And then another thing that I just threw in the chat box that I wanted to kind of end some of my talking about to kind of answer that great question was this model, right? So you have a diagram in front of you. And I think the important thing there in that model, if you can take a look at that image, is that the individual is in the center of just one piece of the puzzle, if you would. And so the individual driving, you know, is driving and can change, can stop one of those things from, or start something, the wheel of the attributes, mindsets, or skill sets. And then all of that kind of shapes what you're heading to. And then all of that moving towards the process of meaning making, how we try to connect people to their resources, why we do the work we do. And then of course you see those other little cogs of the other individuals in the way or helping, depending on how you see them, right? So, so that's something to consider. And then I've got a few minutes left, so I want to turn it back to the group. So.
I think Hannah brought up a really good point in the chat that if we should be separating professionals in the field from the leaders in the field. Anybody have thoughts on that?
You know, if I go back 20 years or so, most of the people in the field were, had specific professional training, whether it was architects, engineers, contractors, that's the world I'm in, or data processing. They had a professional expertise, and they became very involved in the world of environmental sustainability. I realized that over the past 20 years, there are people who want to come into the field because they're interested in sustainability, but they might not come out of one of these academic or disciplines. So I think there's room for both. Just
yeah, I would.
Go ahead.
Well, I would genuinely agree with Hannah what you said, because you know, I think absolutely there is kind of a general interest in the field as a whole, and when you think about professional versus leader, you know, you could have essentially a professional that does their job very, very well and are an expert in their field, and then are sort of kind of morphed into that leadership role just by the goodness of what they're doing, and people recognize that. And so it's kind of like they're not mutually exclusive. It's one can morph into the other in a way. So yeah, defining the terms kind of makes a little bit of a difference in the discussion.
I would say it might be helpful in this discussion, but you could also consider that leadership happens at different levels, and it's not just top down, reminding us that leadership can also happen wherever you are. It's how you consider yourself, and so I would put that on the professional. Do they consider themselves a leader? And there's all sorts of examples of how leadership models and where that looks at. But I think does the professional consider themselves a leader, or just a role model? And is a role model a leader? You know, what are some of those? Why do we carry any connotation with the word leader? And are we reluctant to take on that mantle of leadership? And so I think to that question of how we start to see the field changing, where, you know, the skills of an environmental professional, you know, starting off where you got into the field because you knew a lot about architecture, green building, or recycling in the waste industry, and now you find yourself working across multiple topics as sustainability workers do. I think that's one of the things that I heard from quite a few of the people in education roles that I interviewed that said, I'll train you how to do the greenhouse gas inventory. I care about your soft skills. Like, are you able to talk to stakeholders and make changing that inventory? I don't care if you can work the spreadsheet. Can you, you know, do the other things that require change? So I think that's the implication here is if the soft skills are really what we're looking for, how do we train for soft skills instead of past educational models where it's like, here's how you do the carbon footprint analysis. Instead, here's how you talk to people, or here's how you listen to people about carbon.
Katy Mike,
that was an excellent point.
I was just wondering if Katy Mike had a takeaway for us to wrap it up, where you could summarize some of the soft skills that you found most important in your research and that your interviewees told you are.
So I would say that this would think about it in terms of inter and intrapersonal skills. So looking inward, and as well as looking at how you interact with others. So that can, you know, empathy is often, we think of it as outward related, but do you have the empathy for yourself too? So that would be not only how you interact with other folks, but also how you interact with yourself. And to be honest, Emotional intelligence is a big piece of that. Social and emotional intelligence is a term to look up if you'd like to learn more. But just basically, there's a lot of business books out there about grit and tenacity, and now we're starting to see more about vulnerability and empathy, and reminding ourselves that it's okay to be both soft and hard in business settings.
All right, I'm gonna wrap us up if that's okay. Katy Mike, thank you so much. That was a nice ending. Thanks for asking that question, Jess. Appreciate everyone joining us this morning. It's always good to have these conversations. We do record these, and Freddie's been posting them on YouTube if you want to share. Upcoming events, I encourage people to take a look at our calendar. We have an in-depth session next Thursday on lighting. You light up my life, but is that a good thing? And then our next coffee break will be on August 7th. I think that's right. And we have Michael Willis joining us, talking about community engagement. So that should be a good session as well. So thanks everybody for joining us, and have a great Friday. Stay cool out there. Hannah, you're lucky that you are in better weather. All right.
Sounds good. Bye, everyone.
I wish you were all up here with me.
I wish too. Bye-bye.
Great session. Thank you.